Well, it's great to meet you, Sean. Thank you for taking a minute out to talk about this live album and your life in the music world.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. It's my
Yeah.
pleasure.
So let's begin with your live album from Daryl's House Club in Pawling, New York. Give me an idea of what was the idea behind having a live album? How did this come about?
Well, the last album I put out was in 2021. And so my label, was talking to me, and we this now last year in April and May we were on the road touring, and Daryl's House was one of the venues that was on our schedule. And so before we left to hit the road, I'd say this is probably around March actually of last year. Um, my A&R guy, Mike Carden from Quarto Valley Records, which is the record label that I'm on, said, it's about time you do a new record. Like, what are your thoughts on a new record? Do you have any material together, etc.? And I said, well, we're getting ready to hit the road. So, we won't be back till the end of May. And I said, I got some material put together, but, when we get back, it'll probably take me a good month or two to really start getting the arrangements together and getting stuff. So, so he said, so we're looking at 4 or 5 months. Or I said, yeah, probably realistically after we get off the road and get to rehearse and get everything really where we want it to be to record. He said, well, what about a live album? And because he said the last live album you did was 2011, he goes, you definitely are due for a live album.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a brilliant idea. I said, man, I'm all for it. He goes, well, why don't you pick out one of the venues that you're playing at and, figure out if you're able, if they have the facilities and stuff to do a live record. And so Daryl's House Club is totally set up to do DVDs, CDs, recordings, whatever. They have a whole separate like room that's dedicated to. So if you're doing like a studio built into the club, so if you're doing an album, they have two mics on everything. They have a mic on the amp for the front of the house for the show for the PA, and then they have a mic that goes straight to the board back in the studio.
Yeah.
So basically, we said yeah. So we picked Daryl's House Club. Plus, it's a super cool venue to do a live record from.
Yeah.
Um, and we just approached it like we would do a normal 2 hour show. Anywhere else on our tour. And then once we had that recorded, when it came down to like when we were off the road, I had to pick like a dozen songs that I wanted out of the, I don't know, 25 or so that we played. And I kind of whittled those down, picked out a dozen tunes, and then we mixed and mastered them. And the label did the artwork. They did a great job on the artwork. And then the album came out February 28th this past year. So almost a year in the making, from the point that we actually recorded it. We recorded it on May 2nd, 2024. It
Okay.
came out February 28th of this year,
Right on.
2025. So that's kind of, how the whole concept was born.
So speaking of the grand concept here, how did this journey into the music begin for you? Take me back to where you were born and raised. How did you get hooked into the guitar, the blues world? How did this happen?
I was born in Melbourne, Florida, which is on the east coast of Florida. My dad worked at the Kennedy Space Center as an engineer for about 5 or 6 years. My mom was a school teacher. When I was about 6 years old, my family relocated to Tampa, which is on the west coast, probably 2.5, 3 hours from Melbourne, where I was born. So I kind of grew up. I consider Tampa my hometown. I have vague memories of being in Melbourne, but I was so young, I don't have that many memories. So I grew up in Tampa. I grew up listening to all the classic rock music at the time, especially being in Florida, Southern bands like the Allman Brothers and, Skinner, and, Molly Hatchet, and plus all the other, I was really into classic rock, Iron Maiden, Ozzy and Judas Priest and, bands like Boston and Led Zeppelin, all the, stuff that we were all listening to back then.
Yeah.
So I just knew nobody in my family played music, but it was something me and my friends were always super interested in.
Yeah.
And, we would jam around and kind of mess around and at somebody's house, you might have a drum kit and a guitar or something like that. So I asked for a guitar for Christmas when I was like 11 years old. And I got my first guitar when I was 11. And it was an acoustic. So the next year when I was 12, I asked for an electric and I got an electric. my dad got me one of those old Eddie Van Halen copy guitars, the red one with the stripes.
Oh yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
thought, man, this is cool. This is like rock star stuff. So, anyways, I started learning power chords kind of by ear, sitting on the edge of my bed with a tape player, listening to like 5 seconds of like a Led Zeppelin song. And then I would stop it and try to figure that stuff out and rewind it. And that's kind of how I learned to play.
Yeah.
So I was doing that for 2 or 3 years. So I was about 14 or so, maybe 14 or 15. Um, and I mean, it was fun, but it wasn't really what I thought. I was still kind of searching for like, is this what I want to do? And stuff. And then, so, anyways, a buddy of mine that was about a year and a half older than me had just got his driver's license, and his dad bought him one of those old Pintos. Remember the Pintos?
Oh my, are you kidding?
Like, yeah, like an old pea green used Pinto.
That's
you know.
awesome.
But to us, that was like a rocket ship. That
Oh
thing was
yeah.
great. So he said, "Hey, I just got my license. You want me to pick you up and we'll take a ride?" I was like, "Yeah, man, heck yeah." So at the time, of course, I was living with my parents and well, with my mom. They were divorced a few years before that. Anyhow, so he picked me up in his Pinto. We got in. We're like, cool, man, this is awesome. We're cruising down the road, and he put in a cassette tape, and it was a Jimi Hendrix cassette tape, and the first song that came on was Red House, which is a blues tune.
Yeah.
And it's the first time the hair on my arm stood up, and I asked Phil, my friend, I said, who is this? Like, what kind of music is this? I'm not. And he was like, this is Jimi Hendrix. It's blues music. And I knew right then that's what I've been looking for right
Yeah.
there. Not sitting down doing the power chords, like down, now, down, now, now.
Yep.
So when I heard Hendrix wailing on Red House, I was like, man, that gave me chill bumps. I just knew that's the direction I wanted to go. So I listened to Hendrix, literally nothing but Hendrix for a good couple of years.
Yeah.
I just could not get enough of Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
And then one day I had my license a few years later. So fast forward, I was like, 17 maybe. And a friend of mine, I actually ran into him at the 7-Eleven, which was down the street from where we all grew up. And he came in and he was jamming Voodoo Child. I remember I was walking inside the 7-Eleven and he drove by and he goes, hey, come here for a second. And he goes, stick your head in the car and tell me who you think this is. And it was Voodoo Child. And I was like, that's Jimi Hendrix. He was like, no. He's like, keep listening. And then I noticed the guitar work and the vocals. I'm like, whoa, he's like, this is a guy named Stevie Ray Vaughan. I was like, wow. And then all of a sudden I was like hooked on Stevie. I couldn't get enough of his. I listened to all his stuff. And then I started kind of learning about where he got his influences and I kind of backed my way into the blues. Like then I started learning about Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and Lightning Hopkins and Freddie King and BB King and all those guys. And that was it.
You were hooked.
It was in my veins. It was in my blood. It was, and I just, the rest is history. I just knew that that's the type of music that I wanted to play. And so I always, for whatever reason, I didn't know everybody. The majority of the players I liked were from Texas, but something about the Texas guitar sound always drew me in. Like
Yeah.
I was a huge fan of Johnny Winter, like Billy Gibbons, Freddie King, Albert Collins. Of course, Stevie Ray. I mean, it just seemed like everybody I really, really loved was from Texas. Of course, I loved Buddy Guy and a lot of the Chicago blues guitar players and other guys. But yeah, so then I started my first band and off we went.
That's awesome. When I had my music renaissance in my 20s, when I got into Hendrix, I didn't realize how much blues he did. I mean, I
Oh,
literally, once you open that door up to him, it's like, oh my God, there's so much blues going on.
there really is, and he did it like nobody else. Like people are still trying to figure out how he got some of them sounds and did what he did.
Yeah, it's
It's
amazing.
really, it really is. I mean, not to mention that he was a lefty.
Yeah,
So, he didn't have his guitar strung for a lefty. He just got a regular guitar and turned it upside down. So, like normally when your high strings are up here when you're soloing, his
yeah.
high strings were here on the top. So he was bending down and doing just like to me, still uncomprehendable.
That's like Leonardo da Vinci stuff, where he could
Yeah.
write and he could do two things at once. I
Yeah.
saw a clip with Paul McCartney at one point, and they were like, "Who blew you away? Who'd you see?" And he was talking about Hendrix. Like
Really?
oh yeah, dude. Like he was like no one could figure that dude out. And
Yeah.
anybody that saw him, and I've interviewed scant numbers of people that would catch him back in the day when tickets weren't scalped and it wasn't weird. You would just go to a show. Hendrix was on the bill,
Yeah.
whether it was Monterey or wherever, and he just absolutely blew the top off of anything he did.
It was unreal. I mean, I wish I could have seen him, man. If I could go back in time and just be a fly on the wall and see one of those shows, you know.
Totally. So,
You know what I mean?
but speaking of live shows, what was the first live show that you saw that blew you away that made you think, I want to be up there one day?
Oh, well, I don't even. Oh man. Well, my very first concert was Kiss, and I was 11 years old, almost 12, after I'd got my first guitar. Well, shortly before I got my first guitar, because wasn't Christmas yet. I think it was in the summer, but it was at the Lakeland Civic Center, and I had a buddy that lived behind me. His name was Harley, and we had to beg our parents. Every Halloween, we would always dress up like Kiss. It was like a big thing for us, and that was my first record album. Was Kiss Alive too. You know, and it was vinyl, and you open it
Oh,
up and you look at all
yeah.
the pictures, and they're blowing fire and stuff. And
That's right.
yeah, so Kiss was coming to the Lakeland Civic Center, and me and Harley asked our parents, you know, can we go see Kiss? They're like, no, you're not going to see Kiss. You're 11 years old. You know what I mean? So my dad was a consultant, so he did a lot of traveling in and out of town. So after like 2 months of like begging and pleading with our parents, my mom figured out my dad was going to be out of town. So my friend's mom, Evelyn was her name, Harley's mom, Evelyn, and my mom said they finally got, you know, tired of hearing us beg, you know, to go to see Kiss. And so they said, well, what if we take them, you know, we could just go out to dinner and then just pick them up right after the show. So that's what they did. They said, we're going to drop you off at the front door. And right after the show, you guys have to be right back here where we dropped you off. And so that was my first concert. And
Yeah.
that concert made me say, yeah, this is what I want to do. But I mean,
Yeah.
what a first concert to see, though. I mean, with all the explosions and the
Oh,
makeup,
yeah.
you know. But that's not the kind of music I gravitated towards playing. It was
Yeah.
blues. When I discovered Jimi Hendrix, it was like all that was out the window.
Yeah, that was it. You know what's weird? I saw my first concert was Kiss, but it was Animalize when they did
Really?
it was when they did no makeup. And it was
Oh,
like,
yeah, that was cool.
yeah, it was cool, but it was like I don't think they did it. That was the only tour they did. They were like, "Nah, we got to do the makeup." Because it was kind
Yeah.
of weird. But I remember collecting Kiss cards when I was a kid, and it would
Yeah.
freak me out to see Gene Simmons with all that blood. I just thought he was some kind of horror film.
So he's a demon.
Oh my God.
You
It
know?
was wild.
Yeah, I can remember him spitting blood from the stage and his tongue and the whole thing and the fire and the like. I was going, what the? It
Oh,
was quite the spectacle, especially being a kid like that.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So when you finally hit the stage, did you know that that was that was what you were going to do with your life? Was there an epiphany you had?
Well, yeah, my very first gig ever um was before I started my first band. It was right around the time I was getting ready to start my first band. And I was probably 18 or so. And there was a thing back then in Tampa when I was growing up. It was like a musicians, not a musicians union. It was like a musicians. I forget the exact name, but it was like $50 a year, something like that.
Yeah.
And you sign up, and if bands need a guitar player or they need a drummer or they need a bass player, say you play bass, they say, "Hey Joe, we need a bass player," you know, and somebody will call you up from the musicians association, or whatever it was called back then. And so I had joined up and I hadn't gotten anything for months. I was like, this is a big racket. I'm not, this isn't, you know. One day I got a just call out of the blue, and the guy from the musicians association said, hey, there's this band called Snake Eye, and they just do covers. They're just a cover band. Their guitar player is going to be out of town, so they need somebody to fill in on guitar for them. They said that you can do about 2 weeks of practice. They practice at the drummer's house, I believe it was, and so you should be able to get 6, 7, 8 good practices in with them, and it'll pay you $50. And I was like, yeah, man, count me in.
Yeah.
You know, and so I went and practiced with them guys for a couple of weeks. Like we did Tom Petty songs and, you know, Leonard Skinner, but there was another guitar player who did most of the leads. I was just kind of, you know, doing some rhythms and following along.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was like 18 years old, and I believe somewhere around there. And we did that show, and I was nervous as I could, you could get. And it's first time being on stage in front of people, even though it was just a little club,
Yeah.
little local dive. And then I remember at the end of the night just feeling like I'd conquered that. I was like,
Yeah.
man, I did it. And then the guy gave me $50.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I just made $50 for playing my guitar.
Yeah.
That's like crazy.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's when I said, this is definitely what I want to start doing. So then I started my first band, which was called Code Blue. And then we started playing covers, and then in 1998 I did my first album, and then on from there.
So the one thing about being a musician is I don't think people pay credence to the fact that there's longevity involved. All of these years that you've done it, all these years you've evolved, you've stuck to the craft. What is it that gets you up every day? What do you love the best about being a professional musician and doing it for as long as you have?
Well, for one, I would say, like now at my age now, decades later, that my guitar's taken me around the world, several times. And in 1998, I got a call from my manager, and he started managing Hubert Sumlin. And Hubert was Howlin' Wolf's guitar player for like 25 years
Yeah.
and wrote all the licks that Killing Floor and, all the stuff that Zeppelin and Hendrix and those guys redid.
Yeah.
Hubert wrote a lot of that stuff. And
Yeah.
my manager called me up in 1998 and said, Hugh, I just started managing Hubert, and he needs a band for Blues Stock in Memphis, Tennessee in October of 1998. And would you guys want to back him up? I said, yeah. So we went and did the show with Hubert in Memphis, Tennessee. And he said, man, I want you guys to be my group, my full-time group. And he had always been a sideman. He never really had his own band. So I played with him for about 4.5 years. And I kind of consider that my college education in the blues. Um, so back to your original question. I mean, I got to play with Hubert, which was really kind of kickstarted me into my career.
Yeah.
And then I did my first record shortly before I played with Hubert, 98. After I quit playing with Hubert around 2004, I did my second album. And then we started touring a little bit more regularly. But, I've had a lot of people come up to me and tell me how much the music has helped them get through hard times. And, whether it's a divorce or a death or whatever. It's just the music, when you play it live, you start realizing after you do it for a while, it starts becoming, and you get a following, it starts becoming bigger than you. It's like, okay, this is what I wanted to do for me originally.
Yeah.
But now you realize that, you're helping people forget about all their problems and stuff for 2 or 3 hours when they're at your show.
Yeah.
And that's always been a real big factor for me in keeping to do music. It's like, if what I'm doing and I have this gift, if it can help other people and people, go out of their way to tell me that. I mean, I could tell you stories, but I won't get into all of it, but you get the idea. And it's like, man, I'm actually doing something that's not just that I enjoy, but is actually helping people in a certain kind of way.
Absolutely.
And so it just began. And then I did another record and another record, another record, and kept touring. And you get to a point where you're my age where it's just like, it's part of you. It's part of who you are. Like, I can't imagine retiring. Even if I won the lotto,
Yeah.
I would still want to go out and do some tours here and there. And,
Yeah.
because you see all these bands that say we're retired and it's their last tour. And
Yeah.
then a year or two later, they're back out on the
They're
road.
back out.
And it
Kiss
may or
has
may
done it.
not. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I saw Kiss's last tour freaking 20 years ago.
Yeah. Right.
Seriously, and they've been touring ever since. But um, yeah, so it's one of those things. Like, a lot of bands go back on the road. It may or may not be for the money. They may realize, hey, we can make millions if we go back on the road. But I think some of the guys do it. Like, take BB King, for example. He played until he died. And I mean, I met BB and played a few shows with BB, and he was the most humble, nicest man you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
And he didn't have to be out there touring like he was, like
Yeah.
250 days a year, but that's what he wanted to do. It was just who he was. And so I think it's just when I was playing with guys like Hubert, and Hubert died back, and I think it was around 2010 or 11, if I'm not mistaken. But we made each other a promise, and he goes, man, one night we were sitting up at the bar after a show, and he goes, let's keep playing these blues, Sean, until we can't do it no more. And he goes, because you know what? And I said, what? He goes, because one day we're not going to be able to do it anymore. And so he's passed away now. And I just feel like, I have this gift, and I had people that I looked up to that I was able to play with
Yeah.
that believed in me. and I just owe it to myself, and I owe it to people, kind of, but I at least owe it to myself and to hear, people like Hubert and stuff to keep doing it as long as I can. I
Yeah.
mean, 'cause at my age, what am I going to do? You know,
You know,
and there's not really a lot others that I want to do, to be
yeah,
honest with you.
totally. It's
Yeah,
interesting. I cover jazz, and a lot of the older jazz cats want to teach the younger cats. They want to be around. They're passing that torch on. How does the
yeah,
blues world work? What like BB King, it seems to me a part of what he was doing was keeping that light going for this art form that he loved and dedicated his life to.
absolutely. Yeah. I think there's not much difference. It's just a style of music, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It's just you want, especially nowadays, man, the music business is changing so dramatically, just like the rest of the world. Not just the music business, a lot of businesses and the
Yeah.
way people operate.
Yeah.
So it's not easier nowadays. It's harder, especially with streaming. Like the royalties are not, I mean, 10, 15 years ago, my royalties were like part of my monthly income.
Yeah.
And now they're not because everybody streams stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So I count on, my gigs and our merch sales at gigs like t-shirts, CDs and koozies and posters, and etc. to bring in the money, because royalties aren't doing it anymore, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. How's the scene? How is the scene in America for blues? Is it strong? Has it gotten stronger? Where's it at right now?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's strong, but a lot of the blues players are getting older. Of course, there's a lot of great new young talent coming up. It's pretty amazing. But the blues fans in general, I think, are getting older. Some of the venues have closed, some newer ones have popped up. So I think the blues players, as far as blues music, is in pretty good hands.
Yeah.
But I don't see a ton of like young, like when we do a show, there's not a bunch of 20 and 30-year olds there. It's more older people.
Yeah.
And a couple few decades ago, there was 20 and 30-year-old people there. Now we're all just kind of getting older together.
Yes.
Um, if that makes sense. But I think the blues is still alive and kicking. I just hope it stays that way. And I'm just glad I was born when I was, and that I started when I did, and I got to have the experiences that I did, because I got, to have some really cool experiences.
Yeah.
And so, I just keep doing what I love to do. And as long as people are filling the seats and coming to see us, like, I can't see myself stopping anytime soon.
So at the end of the day, Sean, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Um, that's a good question. I try to stay humble. Some of the best players I've ever met have always been humble and nice. It's more the arrogant ones that are like kind of that, never don't last that long, or, aren't really the best ones.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, I'm a fighter. If I wasn't a fighter, I wouldn't be doing this anymore, because it's not an easy business.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give up. And I try to keep it real. And I try to stay humble, and I just try to do my best. And I realized years ago that if I just give it my all and give it my best, I can sleep at night. I'm not going to lay up and go, oh man, I could have done this, but I took the easy way out, or I should have done this, or what if I would have done this? I try to go for it. And I remember my dad got me this little thing back a couple decades ago, and it said, it had a basketball on it. And it said, you'll miss 100% of all the shots that you never take.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
And so I just figured, man, just go for it. And the thing is with music, like, anything could happen at any time.
Yeah.
Like, you could be at some little dive bar, and Billy Gibbons could walk in, and it can change. Hey, you want to go on tour with us for 40 dates? I mean, you just know, it's just, that's what I found playing music, is it's like a roller coaster.
Uh-huh.
And Muddy Waters had a saying back in the day, a long time ago. He used to say, playing music's like a horse race. Like one day you're ahead, you're number one in the business, and then the next day you're, number 9 or 10 or 11 or towards
Yeah.
the back. So you're not always going to stay on top. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So it's just something you have to love and have a passion for, and something that you do because it's part of who you are, I think.
Absolutely. So live from Daryl's House Club, if anybody wants to pick up a copy, catch you live, any of the Good Business previous work, where's the best place to go?
Well, you can go to our website, which is seanchambers.com. And there's links to buy the album there. There's current news on the band, etc. Of course, it's also available at Amazon, iTunes, all your online retailers. For the people that stream, it's available on all the streaming platforms, Pandora, Spotify, etc. So all the usual haunts there.
Absolutely. So I gotta ask you this, since we're coming out of Kansas City. Good memories of Kansas City swinging through here?
Oh man. Well, first of all, barbecue is like one of my favorite foods in
Yeah.
the world. Oklahoma Joe's, dude.
Oh yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, so that's yeah. With
Good living.
that and the blues scene there. Yeah, I mean, I love the food up in Kansas City. I love the people. Um one of my drummers that did my sixth album, Trouble and Whiskey, was from Kansas City, Chris Schneblin.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
totally.
yeah, Chris Schneblin, his brother Nick, and Danielle plays bass.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I've
they used to
seen
have a band,
Nick. He's
Trampled
wonderful.
Underfoot. They used to have a big band called Trampled
That's
Underfoot.
right.
Yeah.
100%. I remember them. Yeah.
Yeah, so Chris played with me. Sadly enough, believe it or not, he passed away about 2.5 years ago. He was
Wow.
only like 42, esophageal cancer and stuff.
Oh, wow.
But he did my Trouble and Whiskey album with me, which was my sixth album, and toured with me for almost 2 years. And when we went to Kansas City, we would stay at his house, and he would take us to his favorite restaurants and take us around and show us the town. And when he would come to Florida to tour, he would stay at our house and we'd take him around and show him. So Kansas City's always kind of held a special place in my heart. So.
Well, when you come back through, I'd love to meet you. Maybe have a plate of barbecue. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you taking a minute out. Best of luck on the album, and it's so great to run into you, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. I can't thank you enough, and I really appreciate your time and you helping to promote the record. I really appreciate what you're doing, and keep up the great work.
Yes, sir. My pleasure, man.
Jazz
Thank
fans, Joe Domino here, the host of the weekly Neon Jazz radio show and regular interview series being produced and distributed from Lee Summit, Missouri. We are very excited to let you know about the second annual Lee Summit Jazz Festival taking place again this summer on June 28th at the Bridge Space, located at 210 Southwest Market Street in downtown Lee Summit. Following the success of the 2024 festival, the lineup will include Lee Summit students, Casey Area Youth Jazz, Paganova with Michael Pagan, Horoscope with Stan Kessler, Brad Gregory, Adam Larson, and the Lee Summit Jazz Orchestra. There will also be food trucks and vendors to round out a day of celebration. Early bird tickets are 2 for $30, and all details can be found at lsjazzfest.com. We can't wait to see you there.